This is a PSA, or public sock announcement. Experts have declared Bombas socks as the best way to warm up chilly feet. These pairs are super cushy, soft, and designed for maximum coziness. Plus, for every pair purchased, another pair will be donated, so someone in need of essential clothing can stay warm this winter. Go to bombas.com/Spotify and use code Spotify for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Spotify and use code Spotify at checkout.
What do Mattel, Banana Republic, ButcherBox, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet that also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. And that's no industry secret. That's Shopify. Learn more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Happy Halloween, Eagle listeners. It's Jessica Marshall. I hope you got lots of candy and enjoyed the unusually warm trick-or-treating weather. But with spooky season officially over, we're on to the next. And that is Election Day, of course. A big one this year, no doubt. So it's time to check in with Capitol Confidential's Dan Clark to talk politics. Big Election Day coming up next week. You are the best person to ask about this. You are in the thick of it. Let's talk about the top 5 races that New Yorkers should be watching out for.
You know, the really important thing to remember about elections in New York this year are the races for Congress, because there's such a slim majority in Congress right now that these districts in New York could very well decide the majority in Congress. So both the state Democratic Party and the National Republican and state Republican Party have all just dumped cash into these races, trying to influence them, get them to a certain place. So the areas that are really the target areas for these parties are on Long Island, in the Hudson Valley, and right around Syracuse. So I'll give you the top 5 of what I think are the ones to watch, and I'll start over in Syracuse.
Okay.
So Congressman Brandon Williams, it's his first term in Congress. He's a Republican. He's facing a challenge from State Senator John Mannion. That district is always very competitive because Syracuse changes politically all the time. It's really more of an independent area.
Okay.
So that's expected to be a tight race that could be even tighter based on redistricting. Then you go down to the Hudson Valley, and that's where things start to get very fun in these elections. Some names that you will probably recognize based on past elections. So the first one to know is the 18th district, where Representative Patrick Ryan, who is in his first term in Congress. He was elected during a special election. He's facing Allison Esposito, which, if that name sounds familiar, she was the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor in 2022. So she lived in Brooklyn, I believe, for 2 decades, but she grew up in that district. So she's moved back and she wants to represent it now. That race is mean. They don't like each other at all.
Oh, no.
And Pat is trying to be a little nicer about it, but Allison is really trying to stick to the law and order message of her party that she's hoping resonates. And it very well may. Right next door in the 19th district is Congressman Mark Molinaro, who, like everybody in state politics, knows at this point. He was the 2018 candidate for governor on the Republican side. He is facing a rematch from Josh Riley, who he says is a DC insider, which isn't necessarily untrue. I mean, he did work in the U.S. Senate as a staffer. He then worked for a law firm working on litigation involved in politics and policy, all of that good stuff. And then right below them, there's this really tight race that you've probably heard of already between Congressman Mike Lawler in Westchester, Rockland County and Mondaire Jones, who used to be a member of Congress and is trying to get back into that seat. They're also particularly combative with each other. So it's very fun in these districts.
Sure, a lot of great sound bites come out of different events that they hold.
Oh yeah, a lot of headlines.
All right, so those are the congressional races to watch out for, right? There's a ton of, kind of races on the state level. It's very location specific, obviously. Are there any on the state level, that are really, notable
Well, we do have the U.S. Senate race between Mike Sapercone. Not sure if I remember his name because he hasn't really had that much of a campaign across the state, to be honest with you.
Interesting.
Facing Kirsten Gillibrand this year, and she's expected to win. She is a longtime favorite in the state. In terms of the state Senate and Assembly, I won't tell you specific races because there are 213 members of the legislature.
Our podcast is not that long.
Right. But areas that voters should watch out for are Long Island and the lower Hudson Valley and kind of the mid-Hudson Valley for those races, and central New York. That's where the majorities in these chambers are decided, but with a big asterisk that Democrats control both chambers already and have a pretty big majority in both of them.
A super majority.
A super majority, exactly. And it would take a very big red wave to eliminate their majority. I mean, they could break the super majority in the Senate at least, but it's very little chance of them taking the majority, I would think.
Okay, interesting. All right, so obviously the presidential race is kind of looming over everyone, right? You know, this affects not just New Yorkers, it affects the whole country, obviously. What are your thoughts on that as it affects New Yorkers and the election coming up? Like, what's the vibe?
Well, we know that people, when they vote in presidential years, they tend to vote from the top of the ticket down, right? A lot of voters go into the polling booth, they don't really know all of these state level candidates. So they say, I'm voting for the Republican or the Democrat at the top. I'm going to do that down the ticket. This election in New York could be closer than recent years, but we see the vice president with a significant advantage in recent polling. But in terms of New Yorkers voting for either candidate, it's more of a get out the vote effort on the local level. So if you have a district where either Trump or Harris is very popular, those candidates in their party might go out and campaign on them, say, I'm with Team Harris. You should vote for me because I support Team Harris, or I'm with Team Trump. The same thing. So it's not so much that New York is going to decide this presidential election, but this presidential election could decide New York.
Dan Clark will be watching the returns and providing exclusive analysis all day on Election Day, so you'll want to stick by CapitolConfidential.com. In the meantime, though, check out our extensive voter guide at TimesUnion.com. You'll find info there about all of the races, the candidates, and the issues that are at stake in this election. All right, it's been a while since we caught up with local news here on the Eagle, so let's get back to it. We'll start with the news this week that a Canadian teenager has been arrested in the swatting incident at Bethlehem High School in September that sent hundreds of terrified students into lockdown, thinking there was an active shooter on campus. There wasn't. We're going to get the latest now on that from Times Union's education reporter, Kathleen Moore. Give me, the rundown of what actually happened, from that day, and what was it, September 11th?
September 11th.
Yeah, so just tell me what happened that day.
Sure. So the school district had already received a couple of concerning calls. Then they got this particular call. We've learned more about the call since then. So this person said that he was a Bethlehem resident and said that he was going to shoot up the football team and gave a specific time, I think 5:15 or something. So that seemed very specific. Now, we know now that the person who's been accused of these calls is also accused of making similarly very creepily specific calls to other schools, causing them to close, in one case to close for multiple days.
Is that technically swatting?
Yes, that is the epitome of swatting. That's like the A game of swatting.
Now, we'll talk more about him in a minute, the suspect, but so what happened after that call?
All right, so so someone makes this creepy call, and the police and the school district decide, hey, this might be real. We better evacuate everyone who's on the fields. There was at that time hundreds of kids. There were multiple games going on or about to start. There were also multiple practices. The football team was indeed out on a field about to practice. And so they had to get all these kids off of the fields. Now, the command that the police officer gave on the radio that we have a body cam footage of was get them off the fields, take them into the school if you have to, give them an escort. But what that turned into in reality was a lockdown. Now, it's not clear exactly how this morphed into that. Students on the field hockey field say that their SRO, wearing a rifle strapped across his chest, came running up to them, shouting that they had to run, saying something about an active shooter. Kids were telling me that they ran down the sidewalk to the school thinking that the active shooter must be just behind them. They were very scared.
That's terrifying.
Yes, and parents, I interviewed parents as well who were in the stands to watch their kids play, who described being just as terrified. Like, this wasn't just a couple of kids overreacting. Kids are taught to hide, specifically to hide. So the police on the body cam videos seem rather taken aback. They keep talking about how the kids are all hiding under the bleachers and that they're pressed up against a wall where no one can see them from the windows. They seem surprised, confused, concerned. A couple of times they raise issues of, hey, should we talk to these kids? Because the police knew at this point that that was not warranted.
How many kids were there roughly? Do you know?
We know that there were more than 200.
Okay. All pressed up against the gym wall?
And underneath the bleachers.
Okay.
And that was in the gym, and there were also more kids. The football team and one other team were in a maintenance garage because that was closest to the football field, which is very far from the gym. Mm-hmm. And then there were other kids who were at a match at the pool, and they were placed in closet-like areas around the pool. So there was people in a bunch of places, but there was over 200 kids, as we've been told, in the gym.
Mm-hmm. All terrified.
Yes,
Largely.
Parents were describing the kids crying. There were very few adults there. The parents described no one as like taking charge. You know, there wasn't like a principal or something.
We kind of know all of this because you requested police body cam footage, right?
Yes. Yeah, so we requested the body cam footage specifically because I wanted to confirm how this order had turned into this. Was it that some police perhaps overreacted and others did not, right? That might indicate how different police were seeing this circumstance. Or perhaps kids were overreacting. Maybe they were exaggerating in their discussion with me. Maybe their parents and other people who saw it were also exaggerating. I thought that was unlikely, but we like to confirm these things, right?
Right.
Okay, so I asked for the body cam footage, and they provided it to me, but they muted almost all of the audio and put big gray boxes so you couldn't see anything. Right.
I know, I saw this video too. You couldn't see anything.
So I talked to the Committee on Open Government, and they were like, look, they can put little boxes over the kids' faces. Like, that's totally legit. And we don't want to publish pictures of kids without their permission, especially not kids in a terrifying situation like this. We're not going to do that. So we would have taken that out if they hadn't. So no objection there. But they were also covering the faces of their own law enforcement officers while doing their normal job. Mm-hmm. They're not in the bathroom or something. They're just, they're like patrolling, right? This is totally like that's the whole point of body cam footage, is to see police officers doing their job.
Right. So your efforts to bring that to light resulted in another series of body cam footage that was less censored, right? Right.
So I appealed, which goes to the town supervisor in this case. Everyone has to have an appeal officer. And the town supervisor wisely told the town attorney to figure it out. And the town attorney met with the police, and they released a new set of videos that did not redact essentially anything except for the faces of kids.
Right.
And a couple of situations where they said the police were saying like the addresses of a kid because they're trying to like connect kids with their parents.
Gotcha.
Right. So those were totally fair redactions.
So the kids were in that gym for what, like an hour? A long time?
The lockdown began a little after 4:15. School district says 4:30. The body cam footage shows them having the football players in the maintenance garage around 4:15. So I think 4:15 is a better number than 4:30. But let's say by the time the kids got into the gym, it was probably about 4:30. Mm-hmm. And the last people left the gym a little after 6:15, 6:30.
So ultimately they decided this is fake. Let's let everybody go home. How did that all
within 30 minutes, they decided to let everybody go home. But no one was deputized to go into the gym and say to the kids, we're letting people go home a few at a time because we think you're safe. We are confident you're not going to get shot walking to the bus. They didn't say that. Now, maybe they thought it was obvious, right? They have not explained to me why they didn't say that. They've said that they should have had someone say it, but that they weren't sure who was supposed to be in charge there. But if they had in their protocol, hey, every 15 minutes we need to send someone in there with a loudspeaker or have someone stand outside with a loudspeaker to talk to the assembled parents. The school district did try to communicate. They put out a message to parents every 20 minutes or so. But most of the kids in the gym didn't have their phones with them because they had been told to hurry. They'd been told to run. They were told to leave their belongings behind. And if you weren't a parent of a Bethlehem kid, you weren't getting these notifications.
Is this a learning experience? Like, what is the district and the police saying going forward?
They're saying that they've learned a lot from this. No one has said specifically that they made any mistakes, but they've said they've learned a lot. And certainly what other law enforcement have learned is to think about how to communicate to people who might be minors, people who might not have electronic communication devices, how to get information to people in the middle of a scary situation.
All right, we know now, this last week you reported that someone has been arrested.
Charged, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a 14-year-old from Nova Scotia.
14-year-old.
14. We don't know anything about him yet. We know that law enforcement in Canada arrested him on Friday and that he was in court on Monday and was sent to a juvenile facility. This person is facing accusations of making hundreds of calls.
Wow.
To a wide variety of schools, a lot of schools, but also other places, including a suicide hotline.
My goodness.
Which I had never heard of before. I mean, I've heard of suicide hotlines. I've never heard of someone making a shooting threat against a suicide hotline.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a usual target for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Schools make sense, right?
Right, and he's also accused of making similar threats against churches, restaurants, the types of places that unfortunately we've seen be victims to these things before.
Okay.
And we don't know why he chose Bethlehem. Police say that as far as they can tell, they have not yet found a local connection. Although it is important to know that one of his two places where he was allegedly getting help from other people in how to do this, one of those places was a gaming system. The most common gaming system that's used in this sort of thing is called Xbox Live. Yes. It's been used in many of these calling threats. In the past, in the United States, when they've arrested people, they've often found a connection that the person had some kind of beef with some other player on Xbox.
Which led to the location specific.
Right. Extremely minor beefs, I want to be clear. Like they're playing a video game and the other person, for example, wins according to the rules of the game. Like we're talking about really minor beefs here. The police have later connected as to why the Xbox Live became used for this call.
Sure. But there's no such connection that they've been able to identify.
They haven't identified it yet, but they've only just started pouring through all the evidence. They seized all this electronic stuff.
Gotcha.
From this person's house on Friday. The FBI has not gotten a chance to look at it yet themselves.
For the latest on this developing story and to watch some of the body cam footage that Kathleen obtained from police, head over to timesunion.com. Let's take a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to talk about new traffic cameras that are causing a bit of a stir in the city of Albany.
Why is healthcare so expensive? What's happening with climate change? And are elections safe? You can find answers to those questions and a lot more with Capitol Confidential from me, Dan Clark. I give you the latest news and analysis from the state capitol and beyond. Sign up now at CapitolConfidential.com. That's Capital with an O, confidential.com.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. If you live or work in the city of Albany, New York, you've probably heard about the new traffic cameras. You may know from watching or reading the news, or you may know because you received one of the more than 12,000 tickets sent in the mail for speeding in some of the city's school zones in the last 2 weeks. Reporter Steve Hughes joins me now on The Eagle to discuss the fallout of this new tech. You have been following, I'm going to call it a saga. You've been following the saga of the new traffic cams that are installed throughout Albany in school zones that are demanding drivers drive 20 miles per hour or less. It's caused quite a stir. What's going on?
So earlier this year, the city and the school district announced that they would be installing these school zone cameras throughout the city. And it's a 4-year pilot program that they're authorized by the state. And what it is eventually going to be is at 20 school zones throughout the city, there will be 2 cameras that will be measuring driver speeds through those school zones, which is about a quarter of a mile around a school. And for context, the city actually has 46 schools. They're only doing it in 20 zones around mostly public schools. And what the cameras do is if you go 30 miles an hour or faster, you will get a ticket. The speed limit in a school zone is only 20. So if you are under 30, you're just going to get a warning. But if you speed over 30, you get a $50 ticket. And that has caused quite a stir.
That hit us all in Albany this month, right?
Yes.
They started with warnings and then they started issuing tickets. So what has happened since they started issuing tickets?
So in recognition that this is going to take an adjustment, the city starts each camera with a 30-day grace period, where even if you speed over 30, you get a warning, a letter in the mail saying, hey, we caught you doing this on this date. After this date, you're going to start getting a ticket. And October 7th, the system went live at 4 school zones throughout the city, and the city was shocked at the amount of drivers who were getting tickets. As of 2 weeks, so the first 10 days that the cameras were issuing live tickets, nearly 12,900 people got a $50 ticket. That does not include the more than 14,000 drivers who got warnings during that same time period. So even with the 30-day grace period, this system, I think, took a lot of drivers in the city aback, and a lot of people owe the city money.
And a lot of people aren't happy. Are you hearing that?
Yes. So I've heard a variety of complaints. Some people have complained about how the system is marked. They do have signs that say the hours and there are flashing lights. But if you're just on your usual route that you've driven hundreds of times, you may miss it. Other people have complained about the hours. The cameras are in effect from 7 in the morning until 6 at night, which is a wide period of the day. And people have said, well, shouldn't students be on school grounds during the majority of those hours? And the answer is yes. I think the reason the city did that is because they want to provide just a uniform rule. Rather than this elementary school only goes till 2 and the high school goes until 7, they just said, this is the time frame for all the schools. And the speed limit is 20 miles an hour before this anyway. So that they said, you speed, you get a ticket.
Right. It's not technically different from what it was before, except for the fact that you're getting caught now.
Correct. It is simply a heightened level of enforcement. And the city did this in part because they simply don't have the police manpower to run a full-time traffic unit, to notice, down by Eagle Point Elementary School, we have a ton of speeders. So for the next month, we are going to park a car down there and we are going to paper people with tickets. This is simply, we're going to put a camera there, and if you speed, you will get caught automatically. And this city says that this is not a money grab. This is about forcing a behavior change. But I did hear from a lot of people who said this is a money grab.
12,000 tickets, that's a lot of money. I don't know the math offhand.
The way it works is the city signed up with this vendor named Flock. And the split is that the city will get $17 of every $50 ticket, and the company will get $33 as compensation for setting up these cameras, maintaining them, that sort of thing.
And doesn't the company also, like, when you get your ticket, not that I know from experience, but when you get your ticket, there's a lot of like photographic evidence, right, of your car and your license plate and all that.
Yes, this is not just a radar gun and you get a form letter. They are video cameras, so they have video of your car going through the intersection. And what they will also provide, if you want, as part of your ticket, you can go and there's a link online and they will show you a video of your car going the speed that it was going. They're doing this because the city wants to make it very hard for you to challenge these tickets. They do not want to spend a lot of time having to litigate whether you were speeding or not. They're hoping if they provide photo and video evidence of this, people will say, you know what? You're right. I was going more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit through a school zone. I'll pay my $50 and be more careful next time.
How much money do they think they're going to make?
So that's the interesting question, because when the mayor offered her proposed budget at the beginning of October, I noticed that it was balanced on the backs of a $6 million in revenue from these new cameras. And this is notable because when the city installed red light cameras almost a decade ago, they said they were going to get a ton of revenue, and they got nothing. Nothing. Because so much of the money was going to this private company. And the city made a conscious choice to say, no, we're going to split every ticket with this vendor so that we ensure we get some revenue. And they're projecting in 2025, when they will have all 20 school zone cameras, all 40 of them running, that they will get $6 million in revenue from those cameras.
That's a big number.
Yes. The mayor was talking about this yesterday at a news conference. She says she does not want to plan on balancing her budget on that revenue. That based on what New York City saw when they installed similar cameras, they saw a very sharp revenue drop as drivers modified their habits to cope with the cameras, either taking a different route so you're not going through a school zone, or recognizing where school zones are in your normal commute and being prepared to slow down for that section of the road. And these cameras a lot of them are on major commutes. You're talking Western Avenue, Washington Avenue.
Multi-lane roads.
4-lane roads that are routes for people to get in and out of the city relatively quickly. And that's why people are going so fast. That's simply the speed that traffic travels on those roads right now. And it's going to take a major behavior change for people to recognize that it's not like you're avoiding a cop speed trap. It's just a camera. You drive past it and it catches you.
The initial data that came out, the 12,000 some odd tickets that were issued this past month, you got to sort of see a little bit into that, right? Like how some drivers were getting multiple tickets in a day, right?
Yes. So the city treasurer's office gave me the database with the personal identifying information removed. So I could see, location, time of day, make and model. And it was really interesting to see some of the quirks. Like there was this one driver who for 3 days in the 10-day period got the first ticket every day. I mean, that person has a regimented schedule. They were going to go their route every day at 7:02, and every day, and 3 days at 7:02, they got a ticket. The majority of the tickets were people barely going over 30 miles an hour, 31, 32 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. Another sort of interesting factoid is 2/3 of the tickets were coming from people from zip codes outside the city. So for people who say this is a tax on city residents, not really. The majority of the violators are people who live outside the city. It's, if anything, talking to a former reporter, he compared it to more of a commuter tax. But the most shocking driver was a unfortunate, I don't know if I can call them unfortunate, someone who simply either did not get the message or did not care. And this driver from, I believe, is the 12203 zip code.
That's an Albany zip code.
And Guilderland. But the driver does live in Albany. Racked up, I think it was 29 tickets in 10 days.
Oh my goodness. Woo.
If you're doing the math at home, that is $1,450 in fines that they owe the city.
Okay, might want to slow down. Yeah. Wow. This is coming at the same time that the city is going to lower the speed limit across the board to 25 miles per hour. How's that going to play into all of this?
Yes, and I think for drivers who are worried about school zones, it's probably good practice because on January 1st, the speed limit on most city-owned streets is going to go from 30 to 25 miles an hour. And it is part of the city's larger push to make the city more cyclist and pedestrian friendly. And the city has had an issue in the last several years with an uptick in the number of pedestrians who have been hit and killed by cars. I believe in 1 year alone, it might have been 4 people were hit and killed by a car in the city, which for a city the size of Albany is a big issue. Mm-hmm. And the city has taken other steps after the fact, like repainting intersections, adding more crosswalk options to make it a little safer. But
speed bumps too?
Speed bumps or speed humps, however you want to call them. They've spent millions of dollars of putting these in neighborhoods where they've gotten complaints about speeding. Mm-hmm. And the idea is simply prevention, to drive a behavior change, to make people go a little bit slower and, not hit other people.
To learn more about where you might encounter one of these traffic cameras, head on over to timesunion.com. That's it for this week. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from the Times-Union's digital team and the newsroom. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks this week to Dan Clark, Kathleen Moore, and Steve Hughes. Questions or comments? Email us at podcast@timesunion.com.